For years, Tom Araya rarely raised his voice about Dave Mustaine. He didn't rant, he didn't fire back in interviews, he simply kept his distance. But behind that calm exterior was a memory he never shook, a moment that turned respect into caution and collaboration into silence. Now, through scattered interviews, sharp remarks, and stories that refuse to die, the truth behind that distance is finally clear. Two kings of thrash, two different codes. In the world of thrash metal, Tom Araya and Dave Mustaine stood on the same battlefield, but they followed very different rules. Both helped shape the sound that defined a generation. Both were driven by intensity, competition, and the hunger to outplay everyone else. Yet beneath the distortion and speed, their temperaments could not have been further apart. One built his authority through control. The other often fueled his through confrontation. Slayer rose out of Southern California with discipline disguised as chaos. On stage, the band looked like a storm barely contained. Relentless riffs, punishing drums, Araya's voice cutting through with precision. Offstage, however, there was structure. Araya was not just a frontman screaming over blast beats, he was the anchor inside a band built on extremity. During the early years, while Slayer was carving out its identity in small clubs, he was working hospital shifts as a respiratory therapist. He would treat patients during the day, then drive across town to rehearse or perform at night. That dual life shaped him in ways fans rarely consider. He respected time. He respected commitment. He understood that if you promised to show up, you showed up. Inside Slayer, disagreements happened. Strong personalities like Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman ensured that. But there was an internal code. The music could be violent, but the work ethic was controlled. Mustaine's story unfolded differently. After being fired from Metallica over substance abuse and unpredictable behavior, he returned west, with humiliation burning in him. That humiliation became fuel. Megadeth was not just another band, it was a statement. He wanted to be faster than Metallica, more technical than Slayer, sharper than anyone in the scene. Albums like Peace Sells proved he had the musicianship to back up his anger. His riffs were complex, his picking was razor-precise, and his songwriting carried bite. But alongside that, brilliance lived volatility. Lineup changes came frequently. Public feuds surfaced often. Interviews sometimes turned into battlegrounds. The same intensity that drove his creativity could also destabilize his environment. The thrash movement of those years thrived on competition, but it also depended on reliability. Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax were building something bigger than individual pride. They toured together, they shared stages, they influenced one another. There was rivalry, yes, but there was also an unspoken understanding that the scene's growth depended on mutual professionalism. Temperament mattered as much as talent. And when those two codes, Araya's measured discipline and Mustaine's combustible drive, collided inside a Los Angeles studio that was meant to unite two giants, the difference between control and chaos would no longer be theoretical. It would become unforgettable. The studio that fell silent. By the mid-'80s, the idea of Slayer and Megadeth joining forces was more than fan fantasy. It was a calculated move that made perfect business sense. Slayer had just shaken the metal underground with Rain in Blood, a record that redefined speed and aggression and positioned them at the forefront of extreme music. Megadeth, meanwhile, was sharpening its identity with increasingly technical and confrontational releases, proving that Mustaine was not merely a former member of Metallica, but a formidable force in his own right. A split project and co-headlining tour would not only unite two pillars of thrash, it would strengthen the entire movement commercially and culturally. The meeting that was set in Los Angeles was meant to be straightforward. Representatives from the labels were present. Schedules were to be coordinated. Creative input was expected, but within professional limits. Slayer arrived on time, Araya steady as ever, Kerry King direct and focused, Jeff Hanneman observant, Dave Lombardo prepared. David Ellefson reportedly arrived as well, offering reassurance that Mustaine was on his way. But time stretched uncomfortably. Studio time was ticking away, and no one knew where Mustaine was. Polite conversation turned into quiet irritation. The longer it took, the more symbolic the absence became. When he finally entered the room hours later, witnesses would later describe the shift as immediate. He appeared visibly intoxicated. The atmosphere tightened. Instead of easing into negotiation, the discussion derailed. Comments about Slayer's latest record surfaced, critiques of production, insinuations about creative direction. The tone was not collaborative, it was confrontational. Kerry King, known for his refusal to back down, responded sharply. Pride escalated on both sides. Then the moment that would echo for decades happened. Mustaine grabbed King's custom guitar, not a random instrument, but one crafted specifically for him, and smashed it against nearby equipment. The crack of splintering wood cut through the room. What had been tense became explosive. Bandmates restrained one another. Label executives intervened. The meeting dissolved into damage control. The project was effectively dead before anyone formally canceled it. For Tom Araya, the financial loss was secondary. What lingered was the breach of trust. In that room, volatility replaced professionalism, and once seen, that volatility could not be ignored. The pattern that never stopped. The failed collaboration between Slayer and Megadeth did not turn into a public spectacle. There were no televised confrontations, no open letters, no dramatic declarations of betrayal. In fact, for a while, it seemed as if nothing had happened at all. The silence was deliberate. Both bands continued forward, releasing records, touring relentlessly, and strengthening their positions within the thrash hierarchy. But beneath that forward momentum, something had shifted. What followed was not war. It was distance. When Slayer and Megadeth later found themselves on the same touring bills, particularly during large-scale thrash events, the professionalism was intact. Contracts were honored, sets were played, crowds roared. From the audience perspective, everything appeared unified. Yet behind the curtain, interactions were minimal. According to later interviews, Araya and Mustaine rarely engaged beyond basic civility, a handshake, a nod, a brief exchange of pleasantries, no extended conversations, no rebuilding of trust. During the Clash of the Titans run, this quiet tension was palpable to those paying attention. Araya would later explain that there was no burning issue in the dramatic sense. He insisted there was no ongoing feud that consumed his thoughts. When he encountered Mustaine, he treated him as he would any person, with basic human respect. But then he added something that lingered in the minds of fans and journalists alike. He was just waiting for him to open his mouth. He laughed when he said it, but it was the kind of laugh that acknowledges history rather than erases it. What troubled Araya was not one explosive moment from the past. It was a pattern that seemed to repeat itself over the years. Mustaine would criticize peers in interviews, speak sharply about former bandmates, or question the integrity of other groups. Then, when backlash followed, he would apologize or clarify. And eventually, the cycle would start again. To Araya, it felt predictable. Say something inflammatory, retract it, resume. In the tightly interconnected thrash world, unpredictability was not a minor inconvenience. Tours required coordination, releases required cooperation, reputations were currency. Promoters and labels watched behavior closely because instability could translate into financial loss. In that environment, collaboration with someone perceived as volatile became a calculated risk. Araya never denied Mustaine's talent. He acknowledged his drive and technical brilliance, but admiration did not erase caution. Over time, that caution solidified. It was not fueled by anger. It was shaped by observation. And in Araya's case, The response was simple: maintain distance, remain professional, and avoid stepping into a cycle that history suggested would repeat itself. Brutal honesty and the question of respect. Slayer had never been polite for the sake of appearances. In interviews dating back to the late 80s, Tom Araya and Kerry King made it clear that originality mattered more than popularity. When asked about other speed or thrash bands entering the scene, Araya answered bluntly that he did not even bother listening if they sounded derivative. King added that imitation was the fastest way to lose their respect. For them, thrash was not a costume, it was identity. Their opinions extended to peers as well. They openly praised Metallica's musicianship and acknowledged the friendship that once existed between the bands, even if they occasionally questioned creative shifts. When asked to choose between Metallica and Megadeth years later, King answered without hesitation. He joked that Metallica had a singer, apologizing to Mustaine while making his preference clear. It was humor, but it was also revealing. That difference highlighted something deeper. Metallica's conflicts, however intense, often stayed internal. Mustaine's disagreements frequently spilled into interviews and headlines. Media narratives surrounding him were filled with feuds, reconciliations, and renewed feuds. Araya observed all of it without stepping into the chaos. He did not match public commentary with public retaliation. When pressed about why things never fully healed, Araya said there was no dramatic issue. The problem, in his view, was simple. Words were spoken carelessly, then apologized for, then repeated. That rhythm eroded credibility. Respect in Araya's vocabulary meant consistency. It meant reliability under pressure. It meant that when you entered a room to do business, you did not burn it down. And for him, once that standard was broken, rebuilding it was not easy. Respect does not equal trust. When Tom Araya was asked directly whether he respected Dave Mustaine, he did not hesitate to acknowledge the talent. He called him driven. He recognized the work. He understood the journey from being fired out of one band to building another into a pillar of thrash. But then he drew a line that explained everything. Respect does not always mean trust. That distinction is not dramatic. It is practical. Araya has never presented himself as someone seeking revenge or holding grudges. In interviews, he has laughed when referencing tension. He has denied the existence of some grand, burning feud. Yet the distance remains. When Slayer agreed to certain tour dates with Megadeth, he joked that Mustaine was lucky those shows happened at all. It sounded lighthearted, but it reflected boundaries. Behind the humor was memory. A studio session destroyed, a guitar shattered, an opportunity erased. More importantly, a pattern of public commentary that made collaboration unpredictable. For a musician who built his career on showing up prepared and steady, unpredictability was not thrilling. It was exhausting. Over the decades, Araya chose a quieter response than many expected. He did not escalate. He did not counterattack in the press. He simply withdrew. Backstage interactions became brief. Future collaborations were avoided. Professional courtesy remained, but deeper partnership did not return. And perhaps that is the real answer to why so many rockers hesitated to work with Mustaine. Not because of his skill, not because of competition, but because trust, once fractured in a room full of witnesses, rarely returns intact. For Araya, the most powerful statement was not confrontation. It was distance, the legacy of a moment. Looking back now, the story is no longer just about one explosive afternoon. It is about what that afternoon represented. In thrash metal, intensity was expected. Rivalry was normal. But reliability was sacred. When bands committed to tours, albums, or joint projects, entire crews depended on those agreements. Labels invested money. Promoters risked reputations. One meltdown could ripple far beyond the room where it happened. The studio confrontation became more than an argument. It became a warning. Word travels fast in music communities, especially in tightly connected scenes like thrash. Stories of instability linger longer than apologies. Even when Mustaine rebuilt his career, even when Megadeth achieved critical acclaim, the shadow of unpredictability followed him. Araya's comments over the years have remained consistent. He does not describe Mustaine as evil. He does not deny his musical importance. Instead, he speaks about patterns, about words spoken and retracted, about moments that changed how he viewed collaboration. His restraint is part of what makes his perspective powerful. He has nothing to gain from exaggeration. If anything, he has always seemed reluctant to discuss it at all. For fans, it is tempting to reduce everything to ego clashes or personality conflicts. But the deeper issue appears simpler: professionalism versus volatility. One approach builds long-term stability. The other creates headlines. Thrash metal survived because the musicians who endured learned when to fight and when to step back. In Tom Araya's case, stepping back was not weakness. It was decision. And decades later, that decision still defines the distance between two men who once stood on the same stage. Do you think Tom Araya was right to keep his distance, or should old conflicts be left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into rock history.